Welcome to the Mile High podcast. This is your host, Dr. Daniel Knowles, coming from an altitude of 5,280 feet, bringing you some chiropractic philosophy and art. Thank you for always listening, watching these episodes. You can find us on iTunes and Google and Facebook and download it in over 30. If you're watching this and you're not a subscriber, to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You always see her come in. We've have some great ones coming down the pipe. Very excited about the episode we're recording today. You're going to be on for a great ride. So if you have not already, most certainly and register for Mile High August 6, 2018. This is our 6th year. Everybody practic, increasing their philosophy, their vision, and their strategy. We look forward to seeing you there. Rise up before rates rise. Get your seats. So, and those April 15th. So you want, and of course, if you're enjoying these episodes, share the episode format you're watching that. So today, I get to have fun interviewing and having a conversation with one of my people in chiropractic. Dr. Zail Khalsa is a gifted practitioner and a passion foundational values and principles and advancing them. Also coordinates the Conscious Chiropractic Secret Group. Standing, it's an incredible resource, and he's just everything related and connected to the chiropractic and helping chiropractors. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Danny. Thank you for having me here. I Led Zeppelin t-shirt logo. We've got a mountain. We've got a spine underneath the M. Is that like it says chiropractic? Chiro. Perfect. Yeah. No, it's great. Like Zoso, Chiro.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's the Zoso. And I got to tell you, we're aging ourselves right here because you recognize that. And
well, there's now a group, I understand, Greta Van something, who is now basically a Led Zeppelin clone, and they're very popular among the youth. So, and they're good. I heard them on TV last night.
So. I'll have to look
very.
Well, I made this shirt.
Yeah, Led Zeppelin
theme, and we were going for Mile High 4, and so we said Led Zeppelin 4 is like one of the best albums in history, right? So we said, well, let's go with that and like make this a Mile High theme. And there was a whole generation of people that were like, oh, it's Led Zeppelin, like you recognized it right away. And there was a whole generation of people that said, oh, it's kind of a cool chiropractic shirt, and had no connection to that. It was Zeppelin 4, which made me feel very old. So,
well, I'm older than you. I think how old I feel.
Yeah. So there we go. So let's just get down to talking tick. It's like you get down to talking turkey, right? So we're gonna get down to talking tick. And you first of all, let's talk about your Conscious Chiropractic Group. Can you say a little bit about that? Because it's phenomenal, and not a lot of people know about it.
A couple of years ago, Todd Waters, who has written the numerous books about the history of D.D. Palmer, invited me to a group that was called Chiropractic Spiritual Warriors. And so I started posting, and Todd and I were having conversations, and I was reading his book, and eventually he asked me if I would like to take it over. And so we renamed it Conscious Chiropractic because at the time, and I still am, I am interested in the major premise of chiropractic, that there is a universal intelligence, or I would use maybe the more modern term for that, consciousness. So I wanted to have a group where we investigated the fundamentals of chiropractic according to D.D. Palmer, and some of the related issues about that, the neuroskeletal tension framework, tone. We talk about technique issues. We talk about things related to consciousness, meditation, chiropractic. We talk about the consciousness of being a chiropractor, not just consciousness in chiropractic, but the consciousness of actually practicing. It's a secret group, so we keep out trolls. If anyone's interested, just Facebook friend me, and I'll add you to the group. It's pretty easy to tell who the chiropractors are that want to join the group. Well, we've been going strong. We've been going strong, I think, for about 3 or 4 years now. Mm-hmm. We have 1,000 members. People post regularly. I post a couple of times a day. I think the most interesting thing I've accumulated is D.D. Palmer traveling library when he left Palmer in Davenport in 1903 or whatever. He had a group of books bound together, and that was like his traveling library. So I've created my version of D.D. Palmer's traveling library. I've got about a dozen references that I think if you sat down and followed them through, you would get a good understanding of where I'm coming from in terms of chiropractic. And, I wanted to understand where D.D. Palmer was starting from and where he was going to go. And so I focused on reading his 1914 book, The Chiropractor, which is virtually unknown in the profession. It's one of my picks for the most important chiropractic book that nobody's ever heard of or even read. Up on the list, I'd also include things like Bill Harper's Anything Can Cause Anything, Speransky's Theory of Medicine, as being books that breeds adverse mechanical tension in the central nervous system. So books like this, and also a series of YouTube talks that I picked that by speakers like David Chalmers, Rupert Sheldrake, that talk about Anapan Bandyopadhyay, that talk about where I see if D.D. Palmer was still alive, his injunction to us was that you should both practice and teach. The question I always had, well, what would he be practicing and teaching? And this is my best guesstimate of what D.D. Palmer would be practicing and teaching if he was alive today. And so that's the pin.
And this is a good point of conversation. Good point of conversation is how far is that from what is most likely taught in our chiropractic schools, which is a whole tangent, which we both know the answer to. So there's 4 big ideas that you sent me. Okay, yeah, I know. There's 4 big ideas, which is why these conversations are so valuable, and this is why your group is valuable, and this is why Mile High is valuable, is to get people connected to resources that they're not getting access to that express chiropractic. I mean, there's other things we can all spend our time on, but this is so missing.
We were just discussing the profession, and our apologies to young students. At least when I went to school, I graduated in 1985. There was still chiropractic left in schools. It was a small percentage, but so our apologies to students. There's no chiropractic left in chiropractic college, except it's the name's not even, the name isn't even there, right? Because now it's Palmer University or Health Sciences,
right? Sadly, so there was 4.
We apologize. We dropped the ball.
Well, my dad, Donnie Epstein, said that there was a lecture where Reggie Gold spoke at NYCC, and this was in the 80s, and he was doing a program. It was off campus. It wasn't on campus. And it was it was a promotional thing for Sherman College to get people to go to Sherman College. And Reggie, in his polarizing way, got up on stage and said, "You should all sue the school because they're stealing your money. They're selling you a chiropractic education. You're not getting one. So you should sue the school and transfer to Sherman." Like, that's how he opened his talk at that time in the 80s, right? So Reggie had a great way.
I bet that went over big with the administration.
I'm sure they loved it, But he had a great way of, creating friends, winning friends, and influencing people. So
speaking about winning friends and influencing people, so I recently read Tim Ferriss's book.
Yes.
Tools of Titans.
Yes.
And Tim has interviewed hundreds of different people from a wide variety of professions, and he wanted to get to the bottom of what's the essence of each of these professions. And so he said, with any field of interest, you can pick 3 to 5 major principles from which the rest of the field can be extrapolated. So
yes.
I wanted to apply that to chiropractic. And so I thought about that, and I came up with 4 major principles. 33 is great, but I can't remember all of them. But the four I can remember, and
Okay.
I think we should start from
Yes, you told me there's four big
it's the
ideas.
principle of
These
part.
four big ideas, and this is
Yes,
great.
so we have health, the neuroskeletal tension framework, tone, and consciousness, which is the major premise.
So let's start with health
So
as the entity. Let's start with that.
salutogenesis. D.D. Palmer phrased it, let's say, in the negative. He said, you have two brothers and they are working in the same job, working side by side, eating the same food. They live in the same place. One of them gets sick and the other one doesn't. And he wanted to understand, well, why does that happen? We could flip that question around, and Aaron Aronofsky, the father of salutogenesis, which is salu, health, genesis, the origin of health, just flipped it around and said, well, why do some individuals, when they're in a stressful situation, why do they adapt? How do they not get sick? Which is really asking the same question. Why do some get sick and why do others stay healthy? I think that we should focus on the issue of health, the salutogenesis. As you alluded to, Bill Harper, the president of Texas Chiropractic College in the 50s, wrote a book in 1949 called Anything Can Cause Anything. And the major premise of that book was that health is the entity, not disease. Medicine, and Dr. Gonstead said it well. Clarence said, medicine is the study of disease and what causes a man to die. Chiropractic is the study of health and what causes a man to live. So we have this schism in the profession, right? One side of the profession wants to become part of the medical team. They want to study disease and what causes someone to get sick and focus on curing illness. But the chiropractic model is to focus on health and what causes a person to be healthy, how do you regain your health when you've lost it? How do you increase your health and vitality? And I think that health model is what's our unique factor, and I believe we should stick to it rather than switching over to the pathogenesis side. The medical profession's got medicine down. They've got the study of disease down. How are we supposed to compete with them in the study of disease? Whereas the study of health is a wide open field.
Well, and we don't have Bill Harper and Gonstead, but Dede said the same thing. He
Yes.
talked about ease being the natural state versus disease. Tone is the natural state. Right?
That's why the word was hyphenated, right?
Right.
Dis-ease.
Right.
Yes.
So ease is the natural state. Health
Yes.
is the natural state. Health is the entity, and that's what we want to make sure stays in its natural state. And even the word healing comes from a Greek root "hale."
Comes from health.
Yeah, HALE, which is to be whole, right? It's in
yes.
Right. So and so healing is being returned to that natural state rather than trying to fight something. So it's a very
I could almost be called an anti-subluxationist. Not because I don't believe in subluxations, but that I believe we should focus not on the subluxation, but on the adjustment and on chiropractic and the benefits. So, the part of the profession wants to medicalize the profession by focusing on disease, and I believe we should focus on health because it's more congruent with where D.D. Palmer was coming from.
Well, in what you just said, people can allopathize the subluxation.
Yes, exactly. It's turned into a disease entity to be treated, where it's really the absence of connection.
Right.
It's the absence of wholeness. So the entity, what we're seeking to achieve is health. We're seeking to achieve wholeness. We hope to endeavor to revive the ability to self-organize and self-heal, which as a person is designed.
Yeah, and if you shift that
simply,
and it's a few degrees of a shift.
Did I lose your sound?
No, I can hear you. I can hear you.
You become frozen.
Oh, did I? You look
Your first
perfect.
second.
Okay.
You're back then.
All right. So
Did you get what I said?
I got what you said.
Okay.
So it's a few degrees of a shift, but it's a completely different thing, and
It's a
it
totally
completely
different
will change.
consciousness.
It'll completely change even your clinical actions in caring for people. You know, because
Absolutely.
it's a different direction. So the second big idea. Let's talk about that second big idea, which
Yes.
you said was the neuroskeletal tension framework.
Tension framework.
D.D. Palmer.
Let me jump back. Bernardo Kastrup, who's a modern day philosopher, said whenever there's apparently conflicting metaphysical positions, look for the point of view by which everybody can say, see, I was right all along. This is likely to be the most parsimonious view and likely to be the most correct. So in picking these four ideas, I kept that in mind. What's the point of view that everybody in chiropractic can say, see, I was right all along. You know, I was on the right track. We want to make everybody right. That's the whole point. And so what are the fundamentals of the practice? And now we get down to that. In the first fundamental, which D.D. Palmer discusses in his 1914 book, is the neuroskeletal tension framework. This would be another way of describing biophysics, biomechanics, the body. So if we say, basically, we have mind, psyche, consciousness, universal intelligence, innate intelligence, and matter, the body, and they're connected via the nervous system. So we're going to have three distinct components, chiropractic. We're going to have our study of matter, which I'm going to describe as the neuroskeletal tension framework. We're going to have the nervous system, which connects the two, which I'm going to talk about in terms of tone. And the third component is going to be mind, where mind does not equal brain. Brain is part of the nervous system. Mind is universal intelligence or consciousness. So the first element, neuroskeletal tension framework. D.D. Palmer envisioned that the nervous system was like a fine meshwork, like a spider web, strung over the framework of the skeletal system. And he was describing a biotensegrity structure. The Buckminster Fuller and his student Nelson, who was a sculptor, designed the first tensegrity structures. And so a tensegrity structure has elements that, for example, the Sherman logo right on your shirt is a representation of a biotensegrity structure. We can think of it as above, down, inside, out, but we could also use that to represent the structural components of the bones press outward, okay? The bones resist compression. So when we say tensegrity, the bones represent the integrity portion of it, and they are pushing outwards. The soft tissues, the nervous tissues, the soft tissues, the muscular tissues of the body are the tension elements pushing inwards, just like the above down arrow on your logo. So these are in balance. In a biotensegrity structure, of which the neuroskeletal tension framework is a description of, we have the compression being resisted by the bones, pressive forces of gravity. The bones are pushing outwards, and the structure is being pulled in together by the tension elements of both passive tension elements, that would be the meninges, that would be the soft tissues, the fascia, ligaments, tendons, so on. Even the nervous tissue itself adds to those tensegrity tension elements, and that's balancing or resisted by the outward push of the bones, and that creates a tensegrity structure. When one element of the framework distorts, the whole structure distorts.
Right. And that's the central element versus a segmental thing of fixing a joint, which is completely a different profession.
Yeah, it's probably more closely called naturopathy.
Right.
In 1905, three students of D.D. Palmer's wrote a book called Modernized Chiropractic. They were Smith,
Yes.
Paxton, and Langworthy.
Right.
Smith was the brains of the operation. Paxton, the female chiropractor, was probably the great healer, and Langworthy was the marketing aspect. No, things don't change in chiropractic.
Yeah, there you go.
They've been the same ever since the beginning. There's always some lady chiropractor who's the miraculous healer. Smith retitled that book Naturopathic Genetics. He took out all references to subluxation and called them ligatight, meaning that there was a tight ligament inside the joint. In other words, he reduced chiropractic to an articular fixation.
Right.
Now, at that point in time, B.J. Palmer was up between a rock and a hard place. They needed to come up with a legal justification or a legal basis for chiropractic. The only book they had available at the time was Modernized Chiropractic. So Tom Morris, his attorney, and him basically made a pact with the devil that they would use this book to represent chiropractic philosophy. The first time was to defend Morikubo in a trial in Wisconsin. Right. And then they replicated that across the country as a mechanism to try to legalize chiropractic. So we made a deal with the devil, and we accepted this joint fixation model as the basis of chiropractic, and we threw away the neuroskeletal tension framework. D.D. Palmer, in his 1914 book, vehemently opposed the idea of pinched nerves.
Oh, absolutely.
The idea of the occluded foramen, the closed spinal window, comes from Smith, Langworthy, and Paxton.
Right.
It does not come from D.D. Palmer.
Totally.
It's not part of chiropractic.
Right.
D.D. Palmer said nerves are not pinched. Nerves are impinged, meaning the nerve is pressed against and stretched.
Right.
1000%. And the tension is increased, not compressed, not pinched, impinged. This is the lever principle. The vertebrae acts as a lever, changing the tension on the nerve. When we adjust, we're adjusting the tension, the physical tension of the biotensegrity structure, the neuroskeletal tension framework.
Right.
We're not unpinching nerves, which means that we gotta do some different philosophy than I love the 33 principles, but they were based on this erroneous model.
Well, and then that also loops into the Mopey definition of subluxation.
Yes, it loops into bone out of place, boopy or
including,
Mopey.
Including an opening.
Yes, bone out of place, the pinching. Yes, pinching the nerve.
Right.
When in fact it's not. It's the tension of the neuroskeletal tension framework. Either the nerves, as D.D. Palmer said, the nerves are too tight or too loose.
Right. Yep, exactly. And that concept is so vital to chiropractic. That book, the 1914 book, was the first chiropractic book I ever read. It was in prereqs, and that was my starting place for understanding chiropractic. That was the one to read. So people, the few of the books you mentioned, Traveling Library, I'm going to put these in the show notes, but I want people to hear them again. This is the Conscious Chiropractic Traveling Library, the D.D. Palmer Chiropractor, Bill Harper, Anything Can Cause Anything, Speransky's Neurodystrophic Principle, Alf Bragg, Adverse Mechanical Cord Tension. As you know, I just did an episode with Dean Harrison, and we talked about that, which is great. It was great to have a conversation with him. And David Chalmers, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, TED Talk.
Chalmers.
That Alf Bragg material, the interesting thing, one of his texts, the biomechanics of the central nervous system. Just that wording of the title, biomechanics, not of the spine, because people learn biomechanics of the joints, but the biomechanics of the central nervous system, people don't even think about that.
Well, Bragg was a neurosurgeon, and he was looking for neurosurgical solutions to typical problems that a neurosurgeon would see. For example, like a space-filling lesion in the spine. So a good example would be a lumbar disc herniation. So Breg evaluated what he called the spinal cord pons tract, and basically, so we have you have the brain stem becoming the cord, and the covering, the meninges, which covers the brain and covers the cord, is what ties everything together. And basically, Breg's work validates Didi's concept of neuroskeletal tension framework. The cord and the cord pons tract is anchored the coccyx, second sacral tubercle, the fifth cervical, the upper cervicals, and the sphenoid. So the two ends are and think about common chiropractic techniques. What do we have? We have sacral occipital, cranial sacral. We have upper cervical techniques, Logan basic techniques, pelvic techniques. This principle of addressing the connecting points where the top end and the bottom end is in space, and what's the relationship between those two in space, torquing or twisting, it's been a basic technique in chiropractic all the way since the beginning. It's a very something that links us all together.
And
many commonality.
Many different technique
masters
discuss those and had a different way of looking at it, a different way of addressing it, but it's something that many shared. Which goes back to tone, which is the third big idea that you had, right? Tone, yes. The principle of irritability of living protoplasm. Let's talk about tone, since chiropractic is founded upon it.
Right. Right. If you get Didi Palmer's 1910 book, which he called the Chiropractor's Adjuster, she said was to adjust the thinking of his students. Remember, he started teaching maybe in 1895 or so, and now this is 15 years later, and at this point in time, there are thousands of chiropractors already, and this book was to adjust the misunderstandings his students had about what he thought chiropractic was.
Mm-hmm.
And on the front page, it says, founded on tone. Now, the question is, what is tone? I think there has been some misunderstanding of what Didi Palmer meant by the principle of tone. Harper, in his 1949 book, Harper was a student of Wes Drain and a student of C. Sterling Cooley, who were students of Didi Palmer. Cooley wrote in the introduction of Harper's Anything Can Cause Anything, that this was the book that Didi Palmer would have wanted to have written if he was able to write it. Those of us like yourself, and now, by the way, talking about that 1914 book, recently in Washington, I spoke at the ICPA convention. I asked everybody, and I always ask this question when I speak, would you please raise your hand if you've ever read anything from any green book, even if you just broke open The Bigness of the Fellow Within and read that something once in your life. Okay, I don't care what you read. Raise your hands. And a sizable proportion of the audience raised their hands. Then I asked them, who has ever read Didi Palmer's 1914 book? And two hands went up, mine and another member in the audience. And this was in a group full of hundreds of chiropractors. No one's ever read that book. So Harper describes tone not in terms of the neuroskeletal tension framework. We often see writings on tone confused with the first principle, that it's a tensegrity principle. That's not what Harper says Didi is telling us. Harper is telling us that tone is the irritability of protoplasm. So let's start with the simplest form of a one-celled organism like an amoeba. I happened for my PhD research to study a paramecium-like organism called a tetrahymena. And these one-celled organisms, they move towards food, they move away from danger, they move towards mates. They express irritability, which we think of irritability as, oh, I stepped on a nail and it irritated me. No, irritability is the responsiveness of living tissue. So it's a reflection of innate. It's the moving towards food, moving towards the mate, moving away from toxins, moving away from danger. It's the innate intelligence of the cell responding to stimuli. So we could call it we could call it intelligent response to stimulus. Mm-hmm. It's the ability, it's really the ability of the cell to adapt to outside stimulus, both in terms of just like once again, the logo on your shirt sometimes is moving away and sometimes it's moving towards. Mm-hmm. So I love that Sherman logo because it represents a lot of different principles in chiropractic. So tone is the irritability of protoplasm. Another term could be renitency, meaning the bounding back of the safety pin cycle, right? We have brain and body, and they're connected by afferents and efferents. So a stimulus goes into the cell, and then there's a bounding back, a renitency, a response. And that's the principle of tone. It's the principle of responsiveness to stimuli. In higher organisms, the nervous system functions taking care, the things that happen in an individual cell. When we get to a multicellular organism, there's a division of labor, okay? So the musculoskeletal system moves the organism, the digestive system processes food, you excrete the waste, you mate with the sexual system, and the nervous system is that system in which embodies tone, the intelligent response or adaptation to both positive and negative external afferent stimuli.
Yes.
That's the principle of tone.
And that is the foundation of what we do.
It's the foundation of chiropractic.
And yet, how often does that actually leak into people's thinking or leak into their analysis or what they're doing with their hands?
Danny, I never even found that description. I've been a chiropractic patient for 42 years, and I've been in practice for 32 years until the last 3 years where I found a copy after searching for decades and decades for Harper. I never even heard that description of tone. No one in chiropractic even understands it.
And it's sad because then you think of how much is lost. So much wisdom is lost.
It's what would bring us together.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I hear you.
It would because actually Harper's description of tone would appeal very much to those elements of our profession who are, let's say, on the more medical side of things.
Yes.
On the more scientifically driven. Remember, D.D. Palmer was both a spiritist and a scientist.
Right.
He understood the science of his day and age. He was well versed in the medical text. He was definitely a scientist, but he was also a spiritist, and we might interpret that in our current language of saying he was a meditator. He was when these spiritist meetings where they sat together and did a meditation. Mm-hmm. He was tapped into transcendental experiences.
Right.
He was a yogi in essence.
Right.
So there's those two aspects in our profession, and Harper's explanation of tone, I think, would appeal very much to the functional neurology crowd, which is where one part of the profession is heading. They want to be part of the medical establishment. In a sense, they want to be naturopaths. They want to use natural means to create changes in the nervous system for a positive outcome in terms of health. And one could see, using this definition of tone, see, I want to make a big table. I want all the different factions of chiropractic to be able to philosophically and scientifically sit down together and say, yes, we have a profession in common. You know, you may choose to practice this aspect of it. You may say, let me jump back. Tone, the irritability of protoplasm, can be also thought of as physical, emotional, and chemical stimuli can replace innate in stimulating nerves. Stimulus comes in, innate responds with an efferent. But toxic stimuli, physical trauma, emotional stress, they can directly stimulate a nerve to respond instead of innate. Harper was describing this as the origin of dis-ease, which he described as function out of sync with demand. In other words, there are no abnormal functions in disease. There are only responses that are not appropriate adaptations to the situation. Innate, the intelligence of the cell or the organism, makes appropriate responses, but a nerve itself can be irritated. You can be deficient in nutrients, like you don't have enough coenzyme Q10, and now your mitochondria don't work, so your brain doesn't function. So I can see, by the stretch of an imagination, where you can consider that as part of chiropractic, because you're saying, you know, this deficiency is causing an artificial response to stimuli that's out of timing with demand. So I understand why some chiropractors want to practice as naturopaths. I don't know where to draw the line, but tone could be seen as something that allows more people to be part of chiropractic.
Well, and then you go back to the thing of, there's a public that needs to have changes to their spine and nervous system that they're not receiving because people are not even educated about it.
Because chiropractors aren't practicing chiropractic.
Right, exactly. And so the ultimate loss is not the profession, but the public. Clearly.
Right.
Right. That's always who is going to have most impacted. Now, with that fourth big idea, okay, universal consciousness, the major premise, and you mentioned mind. Going back to Stevenson's, there are these great diagrams of mind and how it flow, you know, the mind, flow, educated, innate. So let's talk about universal consciousness and the major premise.
D.D. Palmer was most likely, he often said that the world is composed of mind and matter. And by mind, he didn't mean brain. He meant consciousness, psyche. Let me explain it this way. In Newtonian physics, there are fundamental properties that are not described, but rather assumed. Properties like space, time, mass. These are fundamental. We don't know what mass is, but we know its relationship. Force equals mass times acceleration. We know that from these assumptions about space and time and mass, we can calculate when the next solar eclipse is going to occur to within fractions of a second. Newtonian mathematics allows us to do that. It didn't allow us to understand, however, electromagnetics. So Maxwell came along and said, well, there has to be a fundamental property of the universe, which he called charge, and this allows for fields. So we're talking right now through the internet, which is basically Maxwell's equations and the principles of charge applied. So, a few hundred years ago, people would have thought we were insane if we said that we were going to communicate. You're in Boulder and I'm in Brentwood, and we're having a conversation through the ethers, okay? But Maxwell said, let's assume that there's this fundamental property called charge, and we can describe it through these equations, and then we can eventually create radio and cell phones. the third major fundamental, or the third type, we had Einstein talked about things on a big scale, and that's the principles of relativity. And then on a very, very small scale, if we think of the relationship of our time frame to the galaxy, if we go that much smaller, we get to the level of quantum processes. And the founders of quantum physics assumed a principle called spin up and spin down. And this was a fundamental property that Schrodinger and his equations used to come up with the description of quantum mechanics. And so those fundamental properties, physicists have described the world. There seems to be a fundamental property of the world that the quantum physicists talked about, that while we don't know what it is essential for an understanding of physics, and that would be consciousness, which we can call universal intelligence or mind. It's the principle of, you and I right now are having an experience of the world. We're in a movie, and this movie has sights and sounds, it has colors, it's taste, it's seamless. And this experience of consciousness is our most fundamental experience of the world. Many physicists now and philosophers and consciousness scientists propose that we have to assume that there is a fundamental property of the entire universe called consciousness. Chiropractors call it universal intelligence and say there's a universal intelligence that exists in all matter and basically gives it all its properties and gives rise to it. And this is essentially the same thing that quantum physicists are saying. They're calling it consciousness and saying that it's fundamental to the universe. And any description of the universe that doesn't include consciousness as a fundamental would be an incomplete description of the universe. So D.D. Palmer was way ahead of his time in describing consciousness. And he saw chiropractic as a mechanism for the evolution of consciousness. And he speaks about that in an essay called The Moral and Religious Duties of a Chiropractor, which is the first chapter of the 1914 book.
Right. First thing I read in Chiropractic.
Which, let me add in, that 1914 book was assembled by his fifth wife after he died. It was his notes for 20 lectures that he was giving over the course of a month while he would travel around the country to various chiropractic schools between 1912 and his death at the end of 1913. Unfortunately, she just shuffled the papers together in not the original order. And it's incredibly difficult to understand, which is why I've spent the last 15 years editing that book and reassembling it into an order that essay, The Moral and Religious Duties of a Chiropractor, really should be the last chapter of the book. You have to understand everything in the 1910 book and everything in the 1914 book before you can really understand that essay. But D.D. says that he felt that the purpose of chiropractic was to aid the conscious evolution of the human being.
Yep. And that's amazing. And that's how I've always
seen
chiropractic.
I've never seen
I
it.
don't know why I would dedicate my life to something that was less than that. You know, right?
Yeah,
Your
why?
quote, find what you love
Low
and let
back
it kill
pain.
you.
Yes, yes, yeah. That's a great quote by Charles Bukowski. Find what you love and let it kill you. Devote yourself to it. Give
Right,
yourself wholly to it.
right. You know, I so appreciate the space that you hold in chiropractic for people to get that information and get that consciousness and plug into that because we need that throughout chiropractic. So it's one of the things I most appreciate about you. So one, thank you for taking the time to be on the Mile High podcast and getting up early on a Sunday morning to put this together, and also for having it so well thought out and coordinating the phenomenal group Conscious Chiropractic. If you're not a part of it and you're listening to this and you want to know more of this kind of conversation, take part in this kind of conversation, then most certainly get yourself added to that. You know, request to do that. We'll put that in the notes.
Just friend me on Facebook.
Yep.
I'll know that you're a chiropractor, and I'll add you to the group.
Yeah, there you go. So and do that, and so I appreciate that, and thank you again, Zail, for just being who you are within chiropractic. And I know people, this is going to be one of the most shared and most listened to episodes, for sure. And this is the conversation that really needs to be heart of chiropractic schools, chiropractic education, chiropractic technique throughout the profession. I feel, and thank you again for also being a fan of Mile High, and so
Big fan.
yeah, and this is the conversation of the content that we intend to put in Mile High when we have the philosophy panel and when we have the speakers that speak on science, is that they have this kind of conversation. So, or that tone goes through the program, and I try to use that word tone a lot. So, so thank you for listening. Thank you for being a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, hit subscribe on whatever channel you're listening to this, so you never miss an episode. We have a number of outstanding episodes coming out on the Mile High podcast, so we can keep people plugged in to chiropractic and growing, so they can grow in their service to their community and grow to be the best practitioner that they can be to help more people that need chiropractic. Join us at Mile High, August 16th to 19th. Reserve your seat, www.milehighchiro.org. We'd love to see you there. Seats are filling, and this is going to be the largest event yet. I have no doubt about it, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. Welcome home. We'll welcome you home to chiropractic in the center of the country. For those that are committed and have the foundational values of our profession in the center of their mindset, the center of what they do with their hands, the center of their office focus. And again, hit subscribe. Look forward to seeing you all at Mile High. And thank you again, Dr. Zail.
Danny, thank you for everything you do for the profession. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. You know, we're all in this together.
And go to Mile High.
Go to Mile High. Like our page on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Mile High Chiro.